Good evening and welcome to everyone tuning in tonight. I am your host, Christina Hagen, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of Conservation Conversations with BirdLife South Africa. Joining me at the helm is Andrew de Block, who I'm sure will be familiar to many of you as a host of these webinars. Tonight's episode is about lists, something that occupies the minds of many birders constantly. Dr. Chris Lotz chairs the BirdLife South Africa List Committee and will share insights into how this list is put together and share insights into how the list is put together and how the listing committee works. But before we hear from Chris, I just want to let everyone in the audience know that they can communicate with us using the Zoom chat room, and questions for our speaker can be posted into the Q&A box throughout the webinar. If you are joining us on Facebook Live, you can use the comment feed for your comments and questions. And Chris will answer as many of these as possible at the end of the webinar.
Yes, and you can also use the hashtag Conservation Conversations on all social media channels to let us know you're tuning in tonight. And you can catch up on any of our previous episodes via the BirdLife South Africa YouTube channel, as well as our podcast. If you've not done so yet, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel to help us grow support for our webinar content.
BirdLife South Africa is proud to produce this weekly webinar series, but it doesn't run without its costs. If you are enjoying this series and have found the content interesting and entertaining, why not consider dropping us a small donation towards our ongoing efforts to bring you new and exciting content that is free for all to learn and enjoy. Simply scan the Quicket QR code on screen or visit the Conservation Conversations website to find the link in the donations tab. We are extremely grateful to everyone who has supported the webinars so far.
Yes, and now on to our upcoming events, of which there are a few. Our 2021 AGM is going virtual again this year and will be held on the 29th of May after the lab conference has concluded. At the AGM, we'll be presenting the Gill Memorial Medal to one of South Africa's top ornithologists, as well as making one or two quite exciting surprise announcements along with the regular agenda and the annual report, of course. To register for this important event, please visit the Flock page under the events tab on our website. Alternatively, you can email flock2021@birdlife.org.za.
And straight after the AGM, you can join wildlife photographer Andrew Everly and Canon South Africa for the lab photography workshop, taking place from 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock South African time. This 2-hour workshop will showcase tips and tricks for improving your birding photography. Tickets are selling fast, and the deadline for registration on Quicket ends on the 26th of May, 2021. The link to register will be available in the chat room after this introduction and can also be found on the lab webpage. Tickets are 250 Rand per person, and attendees who also joined the lab conference will qualify for the lucky draw and win a Canon sponsored prize. For more information, please email lab2021@birdlife.org.za.
So you'll be noticing a very strong virtual theme at the moment at BirdLife South Africa as we navigate the ongoing impacted world and the pandemic. And we are excited to announce that our virtual African Bird Fair, which was such a success in 2020, is making a return to your screens. And this year it's set to take place on the 30th and the 31st of July. Be sure to watch BirdLife South Africa's media channels to find out more.
And BirdLife South Africa's annual jackpot birding is back, and you can stand to win 100,000 Rand cash prize with an additional 3 prizes valued at 10,000 Rand each. Entry into the draw is only 500 Rand, with only 1,000 tickets up for grabs, and that's pretty good odds if you ask me. All proceeds go towards giving conservation wings, and with over half the tickets already sold, be sure to bag your chance to win this exciting prize by visiting the BirdLife South Africa website and purchasing your ticket before 19 November 2021. The draw will then take place on the 23rd of November 2021.
BirdLife South Africa is very excited to announce our weekend bush breakaway with eco training in the Makuleke concession. Situated in the northern extreme of the Kruger Park, Makuleke is considered one of the best, if not the best, birding locations in South Africa, with specials like rackettail rollers, Pels fishing hours, harness chat, and 3-banded courses. The weekend of 13th to the 16th of August is now open for bookings and will cost you a mere 5,400 Rand per head for 3 nights, inclusive of all board and lodging as well as activities. For bookings and inquiries, you can email projects@ecotraining.co.za.
And lastly, a call to action. The largely intact grasslands in the proposed Upper Wilge protected environment in the Eastern Free State near Harrismith hosts many threatened bird species and other animals. It's also a very important water catchment, assisting with the provision of clean water to Gauteng. Please help us protect this beautiful area by signing the support letter on BirdLife South Africa's website, and the link is on screen now. We'll also post the link in the chat box and on Facebook shortly. It only requires adding your name, surname, and email address at the end of the letter before you press submit. So it's really very easy. And we greatly appreciate your support.
Now on to tonight's main course. Chris Lotz, or Dr. Chris Lotz, I should say, grew up in Joburg in South Africa, where he became fascinated by birds as a kid. Chris was crazy enough about birds that he decided he wanted to become an ornithologist. So he studied for 8 years at the University of Cape Town, eventually graduating with a doctorate in sunbirds. Chris then lectured for 8 months at the University of KwaZulu-Natal before embarking on a postdoctoral research in the USA in Wyoming for 2.5 years, where he focused on hummingbirds. So he went from sunbirds to hummingbirds. I'd love to chat to you more about that, Chris, but while he loves academics and still publishes the occasional research paper, Chris realized that doing research wasn't going to allow him to see the planet's bird species. So he founded the incredibly successful Birding Eco Tours in 2002, and this has indeed allowed him to travel the 7 continents to see and enjoy many of the world's 10,000 plus species. As mentioned, Chris is the chairperson of BirdLife South Africa's list committee, and it's that side of his work that he's going to tell us about tonight. So Chris, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself, show us your face, and share your lovely presentation with us tonight.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so thanks very much. I'm Andrew and Christina, and it's great to be here. So I'm really looking forward to talking to everyone. What's better than talking about birds? So it's going to be a good evening, and yeah, greetings everyone. Thanks for all the comments so far that I've seen on the chat. So okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Unless Christina, is it already there? I think I have to do it again. So let me go ahead.
Yeah, while Chris is doing that, I neglected to mention that he's tuning in from the UK tonight. So hopefully the weather's not too shabby over there, Chris.
Yeah, actually the weather's not bad. Yeah, the spring is starting to warm up finally. There's some nice birds singing outside. It's still very light. It's an hour earlier here. Yeah, I've been enjoying for the time being living in the UK, and yeah, I miss South Africa quite a bit. And yeah, looking forward to coming to South Africa in February for Flock to Marion, which I'll be mentioning in this talk a bit as well. So yeah, so as has already been mentioned, I'll be talking about South Africa's official bird list, which is also known as the BirdLife South Africa bird checklist of South African birds. And the photos in this talk, I actually quite enjoy taking bird photos, but my colleagues at Birding Eco Tours, Dom Rolandson and Dylan Vassapoli, I actually prefer their photos for this talk. So I've included, for example, this Cape Eagle Owl is by Dom Rolandson. And okay, so I'm just seeing how, just trying to move to the next slide. There's just a bit of a delay with the arrow thing. Okay, So yeah, in this talk that I'm giving, I'm going to cover quite a variety of different topics. So I'm first going to introduce to you what is the official BirdLife South Africa checklist, also known as the official South African bird list, basically. Then, who's involved with helping me with the work? I'm the chairperson of the South African List Committee, and then I've got this great team of volunteers helping me do all the work that's involved each year. Who I'll mention all those people's names, and then I'll also talk about the sort of subsets of this main list. So we don't just list all the names of the bird species, but we actually include a lot of other information on this bird list that we do and which we update each year. So there's subsets: feral species or introduced species, and then endemics, red list species, and also the vagrant birds. And then, interesting topic, quite exciting, how are new birds added to the South African bird list? And then, hopefully everyone can hear me. So just let me know, Christina or Andrew, if there is a problem. But and then I'll be talking about the South as opposed to the Southern African Listers Club. So Trevor Hardaker, he heads up this great Southern African Listers Club, but then I'll be talking about the one that's just to do with a single country, South Africa alone, which is quite a new listing club and very exciting. Then how does Marion and Prince Edward Islands fit in? They're islands that are about 1,000 nautical miles south of Cape Town. So it's about 2,000 kilometers south of Cape Town, and they actually belong to South Africa. So how do they fit into the South African bird list? Then we get onto some fairly sort of controversial but very fascinating topics, such as what taxonomy do we use? Do we align ourselves with any of the major world lists? And topics like that, splits and lumps as well, which are related to the taxonomy. And then the sometimes contentious topic, as per the poll that was done, how do we choose common names for our birds, and why do the common names change? They're actually changing a lot less than they used to since we started doing the list, and why is that? And then throughout the course of this webinar, I'll be sort of mentioning ways in which you can use the checklist that we produce. So it's a lot of work by all the committee members to update this checklist each year. And then, so which are the different ways in which you can use it? So just to mention the names of the birds that I show, I put birds in throughout the talk just to sort of keep things fun. So this cinnamon-breasted warbler by Dylan Vassipodi. It's a South African near-endemic, also occurs in Namibia. So the South African official bird checklist, I've had the privilege of heading it up for the last 12 years. So the very first one that we produced was in 2010. It's the one, I don't know if you can see the arrow here, but the other one on the left with the orange-breasted sunbird on. And then the latest one we just produced a few months ago, so at the very beginning of this year, 2021. On the cover is always the bird of the year. So BirdLife South Africa has a bird of the year, and the first one in 2010 and then the latest one in 2021, they both happen to be South African endemic species. Orange-breasted sunbird and Cape rock jumper. They're not always endemic species. For example, we featured ground hornbill, and we featured secretary bird before as the bird of the year, which then becomes the cover of South Africa's official bird checklist. This would be a good time to just thank the sponsors who actually pay for the printing costs of these lists. So our very first sponsor was Zeiss. Back in 2010, they paid for the printing for a couple of years actually. And then the most recent sponsor is Durham Smart Paint. I should also thank the people at African BirdLife magazine, Eve Gracie and the team that she heads up, because they do all the hard work of doing the final sort of editing of the list and then the actual printing. So basically, it's a lot more work than a lot of people realize doing this list. And fortunately, I don't have to do all the work on my own. The very first list in 2010 was obviously the most work to do when we had to compile everything from scratch. But then each year we have to very carefully check that what new species need to get added to the list. We update the red data statuses of the species, etc. And thankfully, I've got an extremely skilled team of all of us are volunteers, including myself. So we just volunteer in our free time to do this work. And in alphabetical order of surname is David Allen, Rory Bowie, Hugh Chittenden, Cullen Cohen, Bob Dowsett, Guy Gibbon, Trevor Hardaker. Trevor also heads up the Rarities Committee that we work with them, and I'll tell you how a bit later. Then we've brought on David Mapisa recently. He's the newest addition to the committee, the BirdLife Committee. Then Etienne Marais, Michael Mills, he's also new. He also heads up this new African bird names group, which we work closely with, because we've only really got jurisdiction, so to speak, over South Africa, not the rest of the continent. And then Fancy Peacock, and then Ernst Retief, Peter Ryan, Melissa Whitecross, Handeline Smith-Robinson. And then when Martin Taylor was still a part of BirdLife South Africa, he was on the committee, did some excellent work in the first few years. And then the late Phil Hockey, he contributed absolutely massively. As I think probably most of you will know, he was a walking encyclopedia. So he helped very much with the first edition and the next few after that. So just to mention a few additional key facts, I've already mentioned some of the sort of basics of the South African official bird list. Most field guides and Trevor Hardaker's list and various other sort of publications deal with Southern Africa. So it's actually 7 countries south of the Zambezi River. But we very strictly deal only with a single country. So only South Africa. Only everything south of the Limpopo River, excluding Lesotho and Eswatini or Swaziland. And then currently in South Africa, we recognize on the mainland 865 bird species. But each year we add a couple of species, so for various reasons, which I'll elaborate on a little bit later. But if we include those subantarctic islands, about 2,000 kilometers south of us, Prince Edward Island and Marion Island, we add an additional 8 species. So the South African official list actually has 873 species in total so far, but it's soon, I think, to become 874 with the sooty gull that was seen, and any new vagrants that get added. It's incredible that we've got 69 species that are endemic to South Africa, or near endemic, or in other endemic categories that I'll elaborate on a little bit shortly. And there's no other mainland African country that has anything near that number of endemics and near endemics. Madagascar does actually have more endemics than that, so it's got over 100. But it's because it's so incredibly isolated. It's been isolated for eons, Madagascar, from the African mainland. So it's got even more endemics than South Africa does. So a large number of the South African endemics are either in the Cape, or the near endemics are in the Drakensberg area. More about that soon. So unfortunately, about 1 in 5 or 20% of South Africa's bird species are to some level threatened with extinction, which is rather worrying, obviously. And included in that are 5 that are actually on the verge of extinction worldwide. For example, some of the vultures and white-winged flufftail. And then we've also, I mean, most of our birds, of course, are regularly occurring. They're either regularly occurring migrants or they breed in South Africa. But we have got quite a large number, 134, of vagrants. And each year a couple of new species do get added to the list. So it's uncounting. We currently recognize 10 species that are considered feral or introduced. Again, more about that shortly. So here's just a bit of an excerpt from the Excel version, but the printed version, it looks quite similar inside. But although the printed version has columns where you can also tick species, so you can actually use it as a checklist. Actually, on both versions, both the Excel version, which is available on the BirdLife South Africa website, and then the print version, we've got a lot more columns than just this. These are only a few of the select columns. So it just shows you, it's not just a simple list of common names. We also include the scientific names, but then we also include a whole lot of other information about each bird species. For example, the red column shows whether it's threatened with extinction in any way. And unfortunately, a great many of our birds are. So if you take, for example, lemon-breasted canary, luckily, globally, that's actually considered least concern. Whereas in South Africa, it's considered near threatened. So I think it does have quite a healthy population in Mozambique. And that must be why it's considered least concern overall globally. But it is threatened to some degree in South Africa. So Fynbos button quail, and I'll talk about the name change of that species. It used to be called Hottentot button quail. It's endangered, so it's more threatened with extinction than lemon-breasted canary that's only near threatened. Then, so basically we give the South African and then the global red data status of each species. Then there's the status column of the species. So if it's a vagrant species, we mark it there, such as red-necked buzzard. It's only been seen, I think, 2 or 3 times in South Africa, if that. So it's considered a vagrant. Then common chaffinch. It's an introduced species that has become feral. So we now include it as a tickable bird species on our list. It's very localized and rare. It's never done very well. It's the opposite of something like common starling or common myna or house sparrow, which have done extremely well as introduced species. Then there's the column for endemic species. So, for example, Fynbos button quail is a true endemic, so it's got the letter E for it, but then there's near-endemics as well, such as black-headed canary, that also occurs in Namibia. So you can see Fynbos button quail, it's endangered in South Africa and globally, and it's endemic, which is, it means that it's a bird that we really have to watch carefully because it only occurs in our country, plus it's also endangered. So just going into a bit more detail about each of the different categories that we update very carefully each year. For example, South African cliff swallow, we updated the endemic status. This, I think, was last year. So it's basically considered a breeding near endemic. It's been spreading into Zimbabwe and Namibia and breeding more there than it used to in those 2 countries because of bridges, human-made structures have actually helped the species. So it's actually spreading and its breeding range. But yeah, so basically we've defined the endemic status as more precisely than ever before. Being the country's official bird list, we have to be as sort of precise as we possibly can, and we have to be as scientific as possible about all the things that we do. So a true endemic really does only occur strictly in South Africa. So even something that occurs marginally in, say, Lesotho or Namibia, we don't include as a true endemic. So to have 18 species that strictly don't get outside of the borders of South Africa at all, it is quite something. But even more remarkable is that we've got 30 near-endemics, and that means that at least 70% of their total range is in South Africa, or the population size, 70% or more of the population size has to be in South Africa. But a mountain pipit actually isn't considered a near-endemic because I would say more than half of its range is actually in Lesotho, at least its breeding range, and then we believe that it migrates away from that area. But we do have another category where we include all 3 countries south of the Limpopo River. So there's funny, remarkably, we have these 2 tiny countries almost completely within the boundaries of South Africa, Lesotho and Eswatini, Swaziland, and we've got a category for the species that occur in South Africa and those 2 countries, and there's 20 of them. So 69 endemics, near-endemics, and species that occur south of the Limpopo. It's quite a remarkable count. The terrible thing is that of the 18 true endemic species, 2/3 of them, so 12 of the 18, are actually at some level threatened with extinction. So just on a brighter note, this is the Victrins warbler. It's one of the 18 true endemics. Also, great bird. This is also one of the 18 true endemics. It's RedLock. Very localized bird. When you get into its tiny range in the Northern Cape, it's actually very easy to see. It's not tricky like Sclater's lock and various other black-eared sparrow locks, also quite tricky. But yeah, RedLock's actually fairly easy to find once you're in its minute range. This is the red form. You also get a form that is less red. It's much more dull brown than that. So moving away from the endemic species and moving to the other subset of the South African bird list, the species that we class as feral. So they're tickable. They were introduced, or they were originally escaped from captivity, and then they've gradually become feral. We recognize 10 of them so far. We're very strict with what we allow in as a feral species. We might be able to add things like red-crested pochard. I believe that there is a population of them around Redflay, so near Pretoria. But so that, for example, could be added. But how do you define what a feral species is? It has to have actually bred in the wild for at least 3 generations. And red-crested pochard might have. We're not entirely sure, but proving it is difficult. So when you do the BirdLife or any other form of citizen science, the SABAP project, or even eBird, please do, if you've got any evidence of breeding, please do add it in, because the data that you put into your listing software, we might be able to use to sort of give evidence that another we can add. It's not just 10, but it's become 11 or feral species in the future. But then it mustn't only have bred in the wild for at least 3 generations to be called feral. It must also become self-sufficient. So, for example, I know that some of the peafowl populations are still sort of human assisted, so farmers still do feed them. That's why I personally have only ticked the peafowls that I've seen on Robben Island. Even though some of the other populations on the mainland, they might be feral, but we still need to prove that if anyone's got proof, please email me, chris@birdingecotours.com, or put a note that we can talk about later, because we, to a large extent, myself and all the committee members, we rely on what other people tell us, what input they give us, whatever data we can get. So we're always looking for new information that we can then incorporate into our list, which we very thoroughly update each year. So rosy-faced lovebirds, it's not overall feral in South Africa or introduced, because obviously in the Northern Cape, it occurs as a wild bird. It's very scarce and localized. I've seen it at Rarities Falls National Park, and the most reliable place that I know in South Africa for rosy-faced lovebird is really remote. You have to go to Pufadder, and then from there you take a road, quite a rough road, when it hasn't been paved, or sorry, when it hasn't been graded, to the north, to the Orange River, to the border of Namibia. And of the 4 or 5 times that I've been there, I haven't missed rosy-faced lovebird. But if you want to get it onto your provincial list, your Gauteng list, it's actually become quite common in Johannesburg. But I haven't personally ticked it for my Gauteng list. I'd be very interested to know from others if they have. My worry with rosy-faced lovebirds Gauteng is that they might have some hybrid genes. So they escape from captivity, and I'm not sure if some of the genes have become mixed up with interbreeding with Lillian's lovebird or other lovebird species. So even though we know that it definitely is feral in Gauteng, rosy-faced lovebird, we're not as sure that it's purebred. So now, unfortunately, there's the less pleasant topic of the red list status, which we very thoroughly update each year on the official list. Barton Taylor used to do a lot of the work of carefully updating each year. Now Ernst Retief does most of the work. And once again, I'm hugely thankful for all of the committee members, all of whom give a lot of their free time as volunteers just to help make this list worthy of being a country's official bird list, South Africa's official bird list. So we unfortunately have a whole 170 species that are threatened with extinction in some level. Not all of them are threatened globally. So fortunately, some of them are threatened only within South Africa. We even had one that went extinct in the past in South Africa, but it was still survived in other countries such as Botswana and further north in Africa. That was the yellow-billed oxpecker. And then it was reintroduced into the northern Kruger National Park and started gradually moving down southwards in the park. So unfortunately, we've got 5 globally critically endangered bird species. As mentioned before, 12 out of the 18, or 2/3 of our true endemic species, are on the global red list. Then there's also species such as white-winged flufftail that are only known to breed in 2 different countries, South Africa and Ethiopia, which is critically endangered, and so forth. So those are just a couple of examples. And basically 1 in 5 of our species are threatened. Quite a few of them, several of the vultures and also white-winged flufftail have in the last few years been upgraded in their red list status to critically endangered. So needless to say, we're very thankful for the conservation work that BirdLife South Africa does. And the least that I can do is just help give up my time each year just to generate a list that has as much information in it as possible. So it's not just a simple list, but it includes a summary of the red list status, the endemism status, etc. of each species of our birds. So off that rather depressing topic of threatened species or red list species, how do we add new species to the official South African bird list? So we work very closely with another committee at BirdLife South Africa, which is the BirdLife South Africa Rarities Committee, headed up by Trevor Hardaker. We don't second guess them. They're already doing brilliant work. So they basically decide whether a new species that someone claims they've seen in South Africa is definitely that species and that the identification has been correct, etc. So if the Rarities Committee accepts a species, then we automatically add it to our official South African bird list. And what's happened in the last 7 years, 23 species have been added. So it's 2 to 3 each year, basically. So most of these are first-time vagrants that haven't yet been seen in South Africa before. Recent ones have been white wagtail and white tern, also spur-winged leopard, and suli gull, which I'm very envious because I haven't managed to see it, haven't managed to return to South Africa to find it. I'm also envious of that that windchat that's been seen in the Cape. Really wish I was there to go and see that as well. Although that's not a new species, it always was on our official bird list. But there are a couple of species that no one ever submitted rarities forms for to the Rarities Committee until we proactively encouraged that process to happen. For example, barred long-tailed cuckoo. I knew that it must have been at least a decade ago. I know someone who surely saw one near Kafurian in Northern Kruger Park, but we didn't have the species on our official bird list. So I basically encouraged her to submit that to the Rarities Committee. And after a few months, the Rarities Committee took a vote, and they, I think, unanimously decided that the record was correct, even though there was no photo, but it was just well described. Obviously, it's much better to have a photo, then you're more likely to have your species accepted. So it's not only new species that are very lost and shouldn't occur in South Africa, but have pushed up in South Africa, such as, for example, the white tern, which usually only occurs in tropical islands such as the Seychelles, and it's not meant to be in South Africa. But there are other ways in which new species can get added to the South African bird list. If, for example, a species is split, such as Cape white-eye was split into 2, and it's now Cape white-eye and Orange River white-eye, that obviously added a species to the South African bird list. So Corey shearwater and Scopoli shearwater were also split, but no one's managed to find Scopoli shearwater yet in South Africa. They've been documented to occur in northern Namibia, so it's getting fairly close. Maybe at Flock to Mariam, someone's going to find a Scopoli shearwater. So do have your camera out and swat up on your ID. We've got an ID guide on the Birding Ecotours website to differentiate between Scopoli shearwater and Corey shearwater if you want to swat up a bit. But basically, if you take a photo of the underwing and also get as many angles as you possibly can, and then you can submit the record to the Rarities Committee if you think you found a Scopoli shearwater, and it could get added to the South African list as a new species. So unfortunately, we always have to be very critical of everything that goes onto our list, because we obviously want it to be factually the most accurate list out there, being the official country list. So unfortunately, we've been forced to remove a couple of species from our list. So long-tailed and Kimberley pipits, thanks to Fancy Peacock and Greg Davies, they had a peer-reviewed paper published, and they basically proved to us that these species were actually figments of our imagination. So long-tailed pipit and Kimberley pipit, we had to remove both of those from our official bird list. Coloured swift, that was always on South Africa's bird list until very recently. Greg Davies questioned it and published a peer-reviewed paper that basically showed that it was a Bradfield swift, which is much more likely in the Kuruman area. So once again, we humbly had to remove a species from our list, and padded swift is no longer, even though in the earlier versions of Roberts that I used to use as a child had padded swift in it. So on this note, sort of related to adding new species to the South African bird list, is this very exciting thing, is the South Africa's Listers Club. And just a few things about this. It's not to be confused with Trevor Hardaker's extremely fantastic Southern African Listers Club, which I'm a member of as well. But the South African Listers Club deals only with a single country, so it strictly is actually just South Africa. A lot of you gave your totals in the sort of run up to this talk. And yeah, I'd like to hear from more people, but it's incredible that Peter Ryan, he's seen 3 short of 800 bird species. So very soon we're going to have our first South African birder with 800 species. All we need is 3 more new species that have not yet been recorded in South Africa to pitch up. And I bet that Peter Ryan's going to be onto those, and then he'll be the first to enter the 800 club. Or will it be one of these other folks? So there's actually 4 people who have seen over 790 species in South Africa. I've seen 747, well, actually 746, and then I've heard one of them only. That was Eurasian bittern, which I've seen many times. It's actually common here, well, not common, but I see it probably about once every 2 weeks here in the UK. And I've seen it in other countries as well, but in South Africa I've heard it only. And we've decided at the South African Listers Club to allow people to include herd-only species, just to help with so-called ethical birding. It just means that we don't have to bother the bird as much. You don't have to lure it out with a tape, as we used to say, or flash the bird, because you only have to hear it. So you don't have to bother flufftails or some of the other species as much, because hearing only is fine. So very excitingly, in February, I'm actually one of the guides on Flock to Marion, and I can't wait to do that amazing cruise, because I'll have a chance to add some species to my own list, my own South African list, so my number should go up. So what can you add on Marion Island? There's 8 species that have been recorded on Marion and Prince Edward Island, which is nearby, that haven't yet been seen in South African waters. So you do get things like king penguins, but of course that's also been seen in South Africa as a vagrant on the mainland. But the species that haven't yet been recorded on the mainland are chinstrap penguin, but unfortunately that's actually a vagrant to the Prince Edward Island groups, or sorry, Prince Edward Island group, which includes Marion Island. So we're very unlikely to get that, but gentoo penguin, that does breed on Marion Island. I don't think we're going to be able to land on the island with zodiacs or anything because of the strict policies they have, but we should get close enough, I hope, that we can see them swimming near the ship. Then there's a couple of diving petrel species. So diving petrels are amazing. If you haven't seen them before, they're very different from anything you will have seen before. They're very different from normal petrels, for example. They're quite difficult to identify. So I would spot up beforehand and have your camera ready so that you can try and tick both common and South Georgian diving petrels. Then there's 4 other species. There's a great duck, there's a cormorant type, there's lesser sheathbill, and there's a beautiful tern. that that occur there on Marion Island, but not on the South African mainland. And all of these, you can include them on your South African list. I bet that that's what Peter Ryan has done, because he's been to Marion before. And then not to mention all the rare seabirds en route. So what happens if we find the first Scopoides shearwater for South Africa, for example? And I still need wandering albatross and various other species. So now, moving to a completely different topic. There are world lists which we, in South Africa, our South African list, you would think we probably try to align with them in some way or work with them in some way. So yeah, first I just want to introduce you very briefly to the three most sort of well-known world bird lists. There's the IOC, which recognizes 10,770 bird species in the world. Then there's Clements or eBird, the Clements or eBird list, which has a huge following in America. They're the most conservative, so they only recognize 10,721 bird species in the world. Then there's quite a new list, which only started after we started. So we started doing our South African bird list in 2010, whereas the BirdLife International and Handbook of Birds of the World list started a few years after that. We may well have followed them to some extent because we affiliated to BirdLife International, but they're newer than us. So we already were following the IOC to a large extent. So we were trying to align a lot of our scientific sort of decisions with the IOC. So if the IOC splits or lumps a species, we also will. So from a sort of scientific point of view, we do what they do. If they change the scientific name of any bird species that occurs in South Africa, we automatically do the same. For example, whimbrel has now been split into Eurasian whimbrel and Hudsonian whimbrel. So we automatically followed that. They actually split Pretoria rock thrush from short-toed rock thrush. And instead of following them, we actually questioned whether it was the right decision. So we actually told them that it should be split, and then they basically listened to us because we know those taxa, because they occur in South Africa, and we had studied them well in South Africa. So but basically, we don't second guess them usually, so we pretty much follow them in what they do. But there's one huge exception. So we don't like just blindly following their common name changes that they make. So, for example, they want, or they have actually changed the name of African mourning dove to mourning collared dove. And I can understand why they did that, because mourning collared dove, they wanted to align that name with Eurasian collared dove and other species that occur in other parts of the world. But we sort of almost, so to speak, rebelled against that. And we didn't really want to just blindly follow them, because we all, as South African birdists and ornithologists, we've always been using the name mourning or African mourning dove for that species. So we don't follow the IC in terms of the common names, and we've got a voting process within our committee, which I'll talk about in slightly more detail shortly. So just to mention another thing, I was going through the three major lists. The BirdLife International list, it's gone sort of crazy in terms of it's the least conservative. It's split more species than any other major world list, and it recognizes over 11,000 world bird species. Interestingly, all three of these major world lists, they still use the biological species concept, which does work rather well for birds. It doesn't work very well at all for plants and various other groups. But for practical reasons, all three do basically follow the biological species concept, but they interpret it slightly differently from each other. So, for example, BirdLife International, I'm not sure exactly why, but they don't use molecular data and genetics as much as the other two lists. So it's just, they vary in their approaches. And then I personally actually don't really think the biological species concept is the best species concept. I personally prefer the phylogenetic species concept, which would complicate things even more and could change these totals again. But basically, there's not enough time to go into this big topic. It's a topic I'd love to give a separate talk about. But in the meantime, if you don't mind, there is an article on our website, birdingecotours.com, about the three major lists and why or how the different taxonomies sort of lead to different totals and everything. But basically, the take-home message from this, what I've been saying, is that we align ourselves with the IOC from a scientific point of view, but we don't do so from a common names point of view. So we've sort of been resisting the common name changes. So an interesting example is this species, the bush blackcap, which is, it's endemic to the area south of the Limpopo River. So it also does occur in Eswatini, Swaziland, bush blackcap. But then, yeah, I'd like to talk about the tit babblers. The IOC decided, based on peer-reviewed scientific papers, to lump the genus Parasoma, which included some East African bird species, as well as the two Southern African tit babblers, and then the genus was lumped into Sylvia, which the genus Sylvia includes a whole lot of true warbler species, such as Dartford warbler, which is a nice bird we get here in Norfolk. It includes Eurasian blackcap, it includes garden warbler, and then the two tit babblers are now included as Sylvia warblers as well. And now the IOC, the major world list that to some extent we align ourselves with, they changed the name of the tit babblers, so they now call it chestnut-vented warbler instead of chestnut-vented tit babbler, and they call it Layard's warbler instead of Layard's tit babbler, because of the change in scientific thinking about it. But we personally, I mean, most of us in our committee don't really, well, at least I don't want to speak for the others, but the effect of the vote, most people in our committee voted for not to change the name of Layard's tit babbler to Layard's warbler. So we retained the name Layard's tit babbler basically through the work that our committee does, and the same with chestnut-vented tit babbler. And in fact, the IC has now taken these out of the genus Sylvia. They changed their minds again. It's now put into a different genus again. So they tried to align with the common name with the scientific name, but then it changed, the scientific name changed anyway. And in fact, this thing, the bush blackcap, has now become a Sylvia. I'm a bit upset about that because we lost an endemic genus to South Africa, Dioptilus. And it's not Dioptilus anymore. It's the only one, this genus only occurred in South Africa and Swaziland. Now it's just considered a Sylvia. But we're certainly not going to change the name bush blackcap to bush warbler. I mean, there already are bush warblers in the world anyway, so it would be quite confusing. So now just going into this, the process that we use. So I've mentioned that we don't just follow the IC when they change their names, when they change common names. We don't just follow them. But what we do in our committee is that we discuss any proposed common name change that the IOC proposes to make, and we discuss it among ourselves in the committee, but we get as much sort of public input as we can. For example, talks like this, I hope for feedback after the talk, just to get a feeling from other birders in South Africa, what their thoughts are. Sometimes they're very valid comments that myself and other bird list committee members haven't thought of. So we try to get as much public opinion as we can. And then as a committee, we discuss in great detail all the issues involved with the name change. And then the interesting thing that has happened is that our committee almost always votes to reject the name change that the IOC proposes. So for example, we didn't change from Layard's titbabbler to Layard's warbler. We kept Layard's titbabbler. And that's what our committee voted to do. So this has actually brought more stability to our bird names in South Africa. And then we'll usually go back to the IOC and other world lists, and we'll try and persuade them to use our name. Sometimes they do listen. For example, the IOC still uses Peru Quran and there was a big movement among the world lists to actually change the names of the small bustards occurring in Southern Africa to bustards. So we would have lost the name Quran, which is part of the South African heritage. However, there are rare cases where we actually believe that for very unusual circumstances, a bird name actually should change. So we, instead of following the IOC or any of the other world lists in terms of what names they use, we actually try to take the lead to a large extent. So for example, we actually do believe that the word Hottentot is an offensive word. So we, at the end of last year, we basically decided that we were almost obliged to change the name of the two species with Hottentot in their name. It was Hottentot buttonquail and Hottentot teal. We changed those to Fynbos buttonquail and bluebill teal. And then we persuaded all of the world lists to actually use the names that we had chosen. For the bluebill teal, because it's not a South African endemic species, we worked very close with the African Bird Names Group, which is a new committee that deals with the whole African continent. And luckily, they, not quite unanimously, but they very clearly voted to use bluebill teal. And in fact, so all the world lists now use Fynbos buttonquail and bluebill teal. So we sort of took the lead in South Africa. It is a South African word, Hottentot, which we didn't like. So we decided we needed to take the lead in South Africa and get the name changed, those two names changed. So yeah, I'm actually almost finished. So there'll be time for questions, but I do just briefly want to mention sort of why it is actually an issue and why I believe it is good news that the bird names aren't changing as much. I did take note of the poll. There were a lot of people who said they didn't mind the names changing, but there were a lot of people who also said that they were very frustrated with name changes or did prefer them not to happen in the poll just before this talk started. So for me, because I've been birding for decades, I'm 48, but I've been birding since I was a young child, as far back as I can remember. So even in the 70s, 80s, 90s, I was birding, and this emerald spotted wood dove, it was called that, and then it changed to green spotted wood dove, it changed to green spotted dove, it eventually changed back to emerald spotted wood dove, and for various reasons, the name of that species, as well as a whole lot of other species, just kept changing, sometimes back and forth. So for me, as a birder who's been around for a few decades, it was just very confusing. So to me, I became very frustrated and confused with the name changes. Now, in 2005, there was a spate of bird names because the Robert 7 made the decision that they would align with the IOC. It was actually a very logical decision at the time because we thought that that would bring stability to our bird names. But since 2005, we've actually realized that the IOC, it just changes the names too often. And I'm losing hope that there'll ever be stability in the common names, basically. So for me personally, I'm quite pleased that since this list committee was formed in 2010, since then, our bird names haven't changed very much at all, with very few exceptions. So I'll give a couple more examples of the exceptions. I've already given the offensive bird names that we felt obliged to change. So this recent paper in 2018 in Ostrich, peer-reviewed paper, I was quite pleased that it recommended that field guide authors and other publications, if they could kindly consider following the BirdLife South Africa list names, our lists names. And that's basically what they do. But the advice was that you put the IOC or the World Bird List name in parentheses after our name. That's basically what has happened in SAST, which was published very recently. Hugh Chittenden, I think, he mentioned that the same could happen for Roberts. But basically, and then for species that aren't endemic to South Africa, we, like bluebill teal, we work closely with the African Bird Names Group, headed up by Michael Mills. I've quite enjoyed working with him and all the other great people on that huge African Bird Names Committee. I think it's hundreds of people are on that committee. And yeah, the effect is that we sort of preserve our language heritage to some extent, with some of these uniquely South African names being retained. Very unfortunately, it's beyond our control. Anything prior to 2010, we didn't exist, so we couldn't stop any previous name changes. So we did lose Dikop, and we lost. Someone gave the go-away bird Tureko Luri example. Unfortunately, we did lose those. It was beyond the control of our committee. So just a couple of examples where the names do have to change. This thing, black-winged kite, was split off the Australian version, which is unfortunately, for various reasons, they took black-shouldered kite, so we had to change our name. Wimbrel, as I mentioned earlier, was split by the IOC into two different species. We've got Eurasian Wimbrel. Hudsonian Wimbrel is the other one. It was a no-brainer. We had to just put the word Eurasian in front of the name. This actually changed before our committee started, but the same thing would have happened. Lesser double-collared sunbird was split into two sunbirds of the same size. They had to change the names into Southern double-collared sunbird and Miombo double-collared sunbird. So yeah, when splits occur, we sometimes are forced to change the name. And then, yeah, as already mentioned, we were forced to change the name of the two Hottentot birds to Fynbos buttonquail, bluebill teal. I don't think many people have got photos. If you do have photos of Fynbos buttonquail, please send them to me. I'd love to see them. Got orange legs. Interesting. This is one of the best photos I've seen. So of the species, very tricky bird to actually even see. We're going to do some extensions to Flock to Marion, where we're going to be looking for the species. I used to enjoy finding them in South Africa for tour participants, and then bluebill teal, quite a descriptive name now. So just very briefly, just before we hopefully we get some questions from everyone. So how to use the BirdLife South Africa checklist. The print version is a very small pocket-sized list, which is easy to take into the field. It's included for free in African BirdLife magazine. There's an Afrikaans one also available. Of course, we'd love to do the other languages as well, but we need volunteers. Just doing the English and Afrikaans versions are plenty of work for all of us. And if there's a volunteer for other languages, by all means, please come forward. And then the Excel version, it's actually more powerful than the print version because you can sort it in either alphabetical order if you prefer that, or you can sort it in field guide order, which is roughly the same as taxonomic order. Because there's Sasol and Roberts, etc. page numbers, so the major field guides page numbers. I believe we're still looking for someone to do the Newman's page numbers, so anyone, a representative from Newman's, if they can come through, that would be great. And then the Excel version, you can also sort it so that the endemics and the different categories of endemics are all shown in one part, and then the red list status as well. You can sort it by that. So thanks so much for listening, and I'd like to end off with this great Cape seabird that I've personally had the privilege of seeing a couple of times, spectacled petrel. Please do send any input or comments or anything that we can use as a committee to improve our list to chris@birdandecotours.com, and then I'll discuss it with the rest of the committee, and then we'll try and see what to see whether to take into account that information. So thanks again, and yeah, back over now to Christina and Andrew.
Thank you, Chris. I think you've shared with us in a very digestible way the work of the list committee, and also helping us to understand how the list is put together exactly. I think there was a lot of confusion about that beforehand, so thanks for clearing that up. And I also think I speak on behalf of BirdLife South Africa and all the birders out there who do use the list, in saying that we really greatly appreciate the 12 years of volunteering that you've put into this, as well as the other support that you give our organization. I think you've shown exactly how big a job this is annually. So a huge thanks to you, and of course to your committee as well, for doing all of this work for us birders. And also thank you for the presentation tonight. I really enjoyed it.
Great. It's a privilege working with BirdLife South Africa, and yeah, great doing this. So yeah, loved every moment of it.
Great, thanks, Chris. I'm going to hand over to Christina briefly now, just before we get to the questions.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks, Chris, for your enlightening presentation. So to the audience, if you'd like to pose a question to Chris, you can put these in the Zoom Q&A box or in the Facebook Live comments. And I'd also like to remind everyone to please participate in the post-webinar survey, which will pop up when you exit the webinar. It will only take about 2 minutes of your time. And next week, we invite you to join us and Dr. Kate Carstens and Prof. Pauline Downs, who will be sharing their work on the conservation of the Cape parrot, South Africa's only endemic parrot species. And now on to some questions.
Okay, I'm going to kick us off, Christina, and there's a pretty simple one here, Chris, from Heather Davies. She'd like to know, what exactly does IOC stand for? You're talking about the IOC lists.
Okay, yeah, so that's a good question. So the International Ornithological Congress, and it's the actual website is worldbirdnames.org. So it's an interesting exercise to go into worldbirdnames.org, and then you can read more about them there. And it's sort of strangely called the IOC list, but it's actually on the website called worldbirdnames.org. Yeah. But yeah, thanks for that question.
Thanks, Chris. And now Eileen Morrison asks about splitting bird species based on genetic differences. And she asks if there's really any point in an ordinary layman trying to tick both species, particularly when they're found in adjacent areas. Even expert birders often cannot tell the difference in the field, which doesn't make any sense to her. So she'd like your thoughts on that.
Actually, I actually love that question because I'm actually not a splitter myself, so I prefer not splitting. Because I think that like birding is actually becoming a little bit less fun than it used to be, where you can't even really identify each species that you see. So some of these, like leaf warblers, the Phyloscopus species in the Himalayas, they're so similar to each other that it's like few people are able to identify them, although their vocalizations are actually quite distinctive. So it's a good excuse to get to know bird calls. You have to get to know the bird calls to actually differentiate those from each other. But yeah, I personally actually don't like I don't like this trend of splitting. So it is very fashionable to split at the moment, and the species concepts do differ. So it is controversial. So not all scientists actually agree that two species should be split, and some scientists, and I'm more conservative, I often sort of think, well, why not just keep those lumped, those two species, and then birding remains sort of within the realms of our vision and hearing, and you don't have to go and get DNA from them to actually be able to identify them. So I'm actually completely with you, but yeah, luckily the majority of species are still identifiable on vision or sound, or in the case of snow petrel, you have to just identify them based on where you are. So when I did a cruise from southern South America to Antarctica, it's only one of the two species that's ever been documented to occur in that the sort of western part of the Antarctic area, and then on the eastern part it's the other species that looks identical. So yeah, so I mean, I actually share the same frustration, so to speak, and yeah, hopefully that sort of answered the question. If there's a follow-up for clarification, just let me know.
Yeah, there's a question here from Eddie Jermike. He's got eagle eyes, and he picked up that the Fynbos buttonquail scientific name still includes the phrase Hottentot. And he wondered about, is this going to change?
Yeah, so I was going to actually mention that in our talk. So it's a good question. I believe inevitably it probably will change at some point, but it has to go through a completely different process. And I personally wish that I had the power to change that, but it has to go through quite a difficult scientific process, and which I don't have the time to be involved with. But I think the short answer is that it is likely to change in the future, but it's beyond the control of our committee, really, unless someone in the committee does decide to get into publishing something about that and going through this sort of stringent, rigorous scientific process to get that changed. It's the same, the word still does exist for the fish called the Hottentot, and the Hottentot's on mountains and everything. And those will probably change quicker than the scientific names of these bird species. So Yeah, good question. Something I was going to briefly mention in the talk, but I didn't. I ran out of time basically.
Thanks, Chris. And so George Ledek asks quite a long question, but with some comments, but basically asking why not follow the combined taxonomy of the new All the Birds of the World book, which lists 11,524 species, saying we'd have more ticks for our life lists, and also from a conservation standpoint, it makes more sense to follow the precautionary principle and assume that a taxon is a full species if one of the major credible authorities thinks that it is.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So actually, I mean, one of the main reasons we didn't follow the Handbook of the Birds of the World list, which is linked to BirdLife International, and it's the same list as what you're talking about in that publication, is because it's a rather new list. So we started before them and we were already following the IC, but that's not a good reason. So if it's not a good reason to continue, if we believe that the BirdLife International and Handbook of Birds of the World list is more authoritative and better for any reason, we would of course have to take the effort of changing to that. But yeah, that leads me to the second part of my answer, in that it's actually rather controversial, as I sort of briefly indicated in the talk. The species concepts are controversial. The Handbook of Birds of the World, who published that, they use the so-called Tobias et al. Criteria, which it's very, very good and sensible, but it's not without controversy. So I personally actually think that they're not, or that they've split too many species. I do, of course, I would also like to tick more species on the life list, and more importantly, from a conservation point of view, it's rather err on the side of splitting as many species as possible. But I think actually from a conservation point of view, in the USA, where I lived for 6 years, there are laws that protect subspecies as well. So I would instead rather push for laws that are going to protect subspecies. Then you don't have to split the species to actually protect it. So for example, the inland subspecies of least tern is heavily protected in the USA, even though it's still considered the same species as the much more abundant coastal subspecies. But then also, not all species are equal. So basically, if you've got two species that are very similar to each other, such as Orange River white-eye and Cape white-eye, and then if you've got something that's completely and utterly different, like a ground hornbill, and if you've got resources that only allow you to conserve 2 out of those 3 species, which 2 out of the 3 are you going to conserve? You're going to choose one of the white-eyes, and you're going to choose the ground hornbill, because then you're going to conserve a greater variety of the genes, because there's much less overlap in the genetic makeup of a ground hornbill and the Cape white-eye. Whereas if you choose to conserve both the white-eye species, they're so similar genetically that you're actually conserving fewer genes. So yeah, interesting. I'd actually love to have a long conversation about that, because it's a topic that's close to my own heart, actually. So it's something to think about quite a lot. And yeah, please, I do encourage further questions just to chris@birdingecotours.com. So if you've got follow-ups to that.
I think that was a really interesting answer, Chris. I hadn't thought about it that way from a conservation genetics point of view. As you say, it would be nice to tick more birds, but I think you make a really good argument there. I'm going to ask another of George's questions because I think he's asked some very insightful things tonight. George is asking, couldn't the committee consider renaming English birds that their names begin with common, like common cuckoo or common tern? Since some birds named common are actually declining in South Africa, and of some conservation concerns. So being called common works against the conservation message because it suggests that they're not of any concern. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a brilliant question once again. And yeah, there's actually many different reasons to change names for birds. But I personally, even though the reasons are logical like that one, I usually prefer not to change names because it's been utterly confusing since the 70s since I started birding. It's just been so confusing with the name changes. It almost sort of like overrides the other, albeit good reasons to change the names. But yeah, with common cuckoo, it's actually a species that's just arrived here in the UK, and it's great to hear them. I mean, they're calling like crazy at the moment. Birds like that, because they're not South African endemics, they're not even African endemics. They're actually, I mean, of course, they breed in Europe and Asia. We don't really have jurisdiction over those names. I mean, we'd certainly like to. I mean, I actually agree. Like, if we're going to change any names, rather change these misleading names. Like common cuckoo, it's definitely not common, and it's a declining bird. So I'd much rather have a different name for it. But that's time. Or with species like that, it is quite difficult for us to really have much sway, for us to actually have much influence, really, because it's not really even. It's not even an African breeding bird. So if I don't know if there's some examples of South African species that are that have the word common in. But in general, I agree with what has been said, and it's a great suggestion. Although I hate name changes personally, so I don't know. I'm not sure if that would be a compelling enough reason. It's a tough one. So, and I'm going to think about it more and contemplate it.
Yeah, I think it is something that does need to be considered, especially as these birds become more, or as their numbers decline even more. So yeah, definitely something to give some thought to. Now from Elizabeth van Wyk, she's interested in which pipit was mistakenly named the Kimberley pipit or the long-tailed pipit, and wondering whether it was actually the African.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I was going to remind myself before the talk. So I believe that Kimberley pipit was, it's like they're actually Buffy pipits, that's like a form of Buffy pipit that did, granted, look slightly different. There may be someone who could put in the chat function, if I'm incorrect, they can correct me. That was Kimberley pipit. And then long-tailed pipit, I believe, was I thought that was actually long-billed, a form of long-billed pipit. So I'd actually like someone else to answer that. For example, if Fancy was in the audience, he would easily answer that. Or maybe one of you guys, Christina or Andrew, maybe one of you know the answer. And I was going to look that up. I actually thought I might get that question. So, yeah.
Yeah, I also actually don't know. So yeah, if you do, I see Mark Anderson's just posted and said Kimberley is long-billed pipit and long-tailed is Buffy. If he remembers correctly. So yeah, someone can fact check Mark if they want to. But thanks for that, Mark. All right, we've got two questions from Lester and Nis that kind of follow on from each other, so I'm going to lump them. I hope you don't mind, Lester. Lester says she's got they've got mute swan on their list, as they were feral in the Cape when they started birding, but they're now extinct. And Lester wants to know, do you remove extinct species from the South African list, and should people be removing them from their bird lists?
I've also got that on my list, mute swan. So yeah, I ticked it. It's near that where it's now a shopping centre. So you go, I think it's along the N2. Yeah, so I remember the site, and I took some effort to go and find it there so I could get it onto my list. And it is controversial, but my belief is that it was a feral species that was breeding in the wild without human assistance for well over 3 generations. So it's definitely something that it was a feral species. Very sadly, after many generations, it actually did go extinct. And I was very pleased that I had it on my list so already. And we actually have kept it on our official list. So it still is there, the mute swan, even though it's extinct. So it's in its own category. There's only one of them, I believe, extinct species. There's a couple of non-feral species, obviously, that went extinct, but then you can still tick them as vagrants or otherwise. So African skimmer, I believe it used to breed in northern Zululand. Then it basically became extinct. Now it's just a vagrant. While I've actually seen it in the Kruger Park, for example. And then, yeah, also then yellow-billed oxpecker was extinct from South Africa, and then it was reintroduced by humans and is now doing much better. So yeah, the short answer is mute swan is actually still on our official list, believe it or not, even though it's extinct.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough to keep it on your list as well. You did experience the bird and it was around, and it raises the question around if one of our local birds does go extinct. You mentioned that there's 5 critically endangered species in South Africa. If one of those does go extinct, it doesn't mean that the bird never existed. So I think that's fair enough to include it on your list. Yeah, I think we heading up to our hard close at 8:30. So I'm going to hand over to Christina to start wrapping up. But just before I do, I see there's some activity in the chat box around the pipits, Chris. So Mark's corrected himself and said Kimberley pipit's actually African pipit. And David Allen also chimed in and reminded us that long-billed pipit is also now Nicholson's pipit. So it's,
of course, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, well, of course, there is a long-billed pipit that does exist, but in our case, it's the Nicholson's pipit that was the correct species. So yeah, over to you, Christina.
Yeah, so all I think that remains for me to do is to thank Chris very much again for your fascinating talk and explaining how it all works behind the scenes. And thank you to everyone in the audience for listening and participating in the chat and with your questions. I will leave the meeting running for a little bit longer, so if you want to put any final comments in the chat box. Otherwise, I think we will say good night and thank you very much. And please join us next week for another episode of Conservation Conversations. Good night.
Great. Yeah, good night, everyone. Yeah. Thanks again.